Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Noah grills Nick. Will Sienna set the bad guy free? Sienna Bacall finds out something bad. Noah Newman is very upset with his dad, Nick Newman. He wants to know what is going on. Nick Newman has Matt Clark in the trunk of his car. Noah Newman finds this. He wants answers from Nick Newman. Instead of telling him what is going on, Nick Newman takes Noah Newman to Sharon Newman's house. They go inside to talk about what happened. Nick Newman wants to have a talk with his son Noah Newman. I really think Nick should have some security guards from Newman ready to help him. This is Nick we are talking about, so who knows what will happen. Nick got Matt from the safe place where the Abbotts were holding the bad guy. Nobody wanted to deal with him, so Nick had to take care of it. This all happened after Matt managed to get free by choking Nick while they were driving somewhere. I do not know where they were going. Is there going to be trouble with Matt? Noah really does not like Matt. He wants to know what Nick plans to do with Matt. Nick has to make a decision about what to do with Matt. Sienna is also listening to what's being said. Nick is very careful about what he says, so he does not say that he wants to hurt the guy, but he does not say that he does not want to either. He makes it sound like he wants Matt to go away. Nick talks about how Matt's not a good person and that he wants to make sure Matt gets what is coming to him. Nick really wants to see justice happen. Will Sienna start asking Nick some questions about what he means by justice for Matt? Nick is all for taking the law into his hands. Sienna married Matt. She thought he was someone else. So Sienna may still have feelings for Matt no matter what name he uses. Matt was really mean to Sienna and her boyfriend Noah. Because of this, Sienna might want revenge of being fair. Sienna knows what Matt can do. She does not want him to hurt anyone else. This could mean Sienna will offer to take care of Matt herself, or she might sneak away to deal with Matt by herself. Will Sienna pull the trigger on Matt? Spoiler alert! More Matt mayhem is coming. Will Sienna find the car trunk empty? If so, she may find herself accused by Nick of letting him go. Red Hot the Young and the Restless spoilers hint that hard decisions need to be made regarding Matt, and a surprise person may be the one to step up and take care of business. Nick Newman and his son Noah as police officers stepped forward with bind, their voices calm but ruinous as they blazon the arrest that no bone saw coming, yet everyone ever stressed was ineluctable, because secrets in this city no way stay buried ever, and this time the fallout was nuclear, spreading shockwaves from the Newman Ranch to the darkest corners of Chancellor Park, where whispers formerly coiled through the cold air about treason, blood, and the one woman who might hold the key to it all, Sienna. Nick, generally the personification of controlled strength, looked rattled as the bond snapped around his wrists, his eyes zipping artificially to Noah, who stood frozen beside him, wrathfulness and unbelief warring on his face as he demanded to know what was going on, only to be told that both of them were being taken in for questioning in connection with indisquisition that had suddenly exploded wide open. And as they were steered into separate team buses, the weight of times of half, trueness, bad opinions, and hopeless cover-up sounded to crash down all at formerly, because this was and just about one crime. It was about a chain of events stretching back to a night no bone wanted to talk about presently. At the station, pressure crepitated as Nick was read his rights, the words echoing in the sterile room while his mind contended back to every choice that had led him then. Every moment he told himself he was guarding his family, every time he believed he could outwit fate, while across the hall Noah slammed his fist against the table, demanding a counsel, and swearing that this was all a setup, his voice shaking not with fear but with fury, because deep down he knew the verity was far messier than a simple misreading. Meanwhile, news of the arrest spread through Genoa City like campfire, reaching Victoria Newman first, who felt her stomach drop as she heeded in stupefied silence before her trademark countenance snapped into action, formerly calculating damage control, while Sharon's heart shattered as she imagined Noah behind bars again, recollections of once traumas submerging back as she rumored his name like a prayer. And also there was Victor Newman, whose jaw tensed as he goggled out over the megacity from his office, fury burning behind his eyes as he murmured that this was far from over, because no bone takes down a Newman without a fight. But lurking in the murk watching the chaos unfold with an undecipherable expression, was Sienna, the woman everyone undervalued, the woman whose silence had suddenly become the most dangerous armament in city. Sienna had always walked a fine line between victim and villain, supporter and adversary, and now that Nick and Noah were in guardianship, all eyes turned to her, because everyone knew she had information that could either damn them ever or blow the entire case piecemeal, and the question on everyone's lips was simple yet intimidating: would Sienna set the bad Joe free, or would she eventually tell the verity no matter who it destroyed? As investigators pressed Nick for answers, laying out substantiation piece by piece, phone records, viewer statements, inconsistencies that no longer added up, he realized with a sinking feeling that someone had talked, or worse, someone had precisely curated the narrative to make sure he took the fall, and when Sienna's name was mentioned casually, nearly as an afterthought, Nick's eyes flitted with a blend of recognition and dread, because he knew how important power she held, and how changeable she could be. Noah, meanwhile, was blindsided when an officer suggested that Sienna had formerly given a statement, a half, verity maybe, but enough to point the cutlet exactly at the Newmans, and as rage boiled over, Noah cried that she was lying, that she was manipulating everyone, but indeed as the words left his mouth he wondered if he'd pushed her too far, if his pitfalls and duns had eventually driven her to choose vengeance over fidelity. Outside the station, Genoa City's moral compass spun hectically as alliances shifted overnight. Phyllis scowled, induced this was air eventually catching up with Nick, while Jack Abbott watched with quiet concern, torn between satisfaction and apprehension, knowing that when the Newmans fall, the entire city feels the earthquake, and nearly in all of this, Sienna sat alone, replaying every moment that had led to this crossroads. Every secret rumored in the dark, every pledge broken. Every time, she had been treated like a pawn rather of a person. For Sienna, this wasn't just about Nick or Noah. It was about survival, about control, about deciding whether she'd remain a victim of other people's power plays or eventually seize the narrative for herself. And as she goggled at her phone, ignoring the shower of dispatches and missed calls, she knew that one word from her could change everything. She could confirm the police's proposition and watch the Newmans deteriorate, or she could expose the real architect and set off a chain. Response, no bone. Could stop. The pressure mounted when Victor's people reached out, offering protection, coffers, and an implied pledge of fidelity if she played her cards right, while on the other side, Sharon appealed to her humanity, soliciting her to suppose about Noah's future, about the pain that would ripple outward if she chose vengeance, and for the first time in a long time, Sienna dithered, because the verity was messy and dangerous, and telling it would put a target on her reverse unlike anything she had ever faced. As night fell, the station buzzed with exertion, and just when it sounded like Nick and Noah might be formally charged, Sienna eventually arrived, her heels clicking ominously against the bottom as every head turned, the air thick with expectation, because everyone knew this moment would decide everything. She looked at Nick, also at Noah, her aspect, moping just long enough to reveal a flicker of remorse. Or was it computation? Ahead, she turned to the investigators and asked to amend her statement, and in that moment, time sounded to decelerate as hearts pounded and futures hung in the balance, because no bone knew whether she was about to save them or bury them for good. With a steady voice that betrayed nothing of the storm inside her, Sienna began to speak, unraveling corridor of the story while tensing others, dropping hints about a larger picture, about someone differently pulling the strings, and as confusion gurgled through the room, it came clear that she wasn't setting anyone free just yet. She was buying herself influence, and perhaps, just perhaps, justice on her own terms. By the time dawn broke over Genoa City, nothing was resolved and everything had changed. Nick and Noah remained in limbo, their faith in Sienna shaken beyond form. Victor prepared for war, and Sienna walked back into the murk with a secret smile, because in a city erected on falsehoods, the most dangerous person is the one who knows the verity and hasn't decided what to do with it yet, leaving everyone to ask the same nipping question as the drama barrels forward. Will Sienna eventually set the bad Joe free? Or will she prove that in Genoa City, freedom always comes at a ruinous cost? The moment Sienna walked out of the police station, the bite in the air felt sharper, as if Genoa City itself tasted that the balance of power had shifted, because nothing terrifies this city further than query, and Sienna embodied it impeccably now, calm, composed, and carrying secrets that could either shatter lives or rewrite history. While inside those Argentine concrete walls, Nick and Noah sat in separate holding apartments, each lost in his own curl of fear, remorse, and defiance. Both realizing that for the first time in their lives their fate rested not on Newman influence or legal maneuvering, but on the heart of a woman they had undervalued for far too long. Nick replayed every commerce he'd ever had with Sienna, every subtle warning sign he'd ignored, every moment he'd believed he could control the narrative, and with each memory came the crushing consummation that he'd been wrong, disastrously wrong, because Sienna was no way someone to be managed. She was someone who awaited, who observed, who learned, and now that tolerance had paid off in the most ruinous way possible. Noah, on the other hand, paced his small cell like a boxed beast, wrathfulness pouring off him in swells as he cursed the police, cursed Sienna, cursed himself, because deep down he knew that his own recklessness had helped push this situation to the point that his pitfalls and half-ignited plans to silence her had only induced her that the Newmans would no way truly cover her. And that consummation eroded at him more sorrowfully than the cold sword bars ever could. As dawn crept closer, the phones across Genoa City buzzed continuous. Victoria contended frantic calls from the board at Newman Enterprises, investors formerly scarifying over the optics of a Newman arrest, while Nikki paced the living room at the estate, her hands pulsing as she tried to hold herself together for Victor, whose fury coddled just beneath the face, his mind formerly mapping out countersalts, legal loopholes, and pressure points, because Victor Newman didn't lose. And he clearly didn't lose his family, without unleashing a storm. Meanwhile, Sharon sat alone in her kitchen, gaping at a print of Noah from happier days, gashes barring down her face as she rumored justifications she could no way take back, wondering if she had failed him by believing too fluently that his once demons were behind him, and in that quiet heartache lay the true cost of Sienna's decision to delay the verity, families unraveling, trust corroding, hope hanging by a thread. Outside of the Newman route, Genoa City's scuttlebutt shop churned relentlessly, with Phyllis gleefully assuming that Nick had eventually crossed a line he could abolish, while Jack Abbott set up himself suddenly disaccorded, because although he'd battered with Nick for times, seeing him in bind forced Jack to defy an uncomfortable verity. Some battles go too far, and some palms taste like ash. But the most dangerous responses came not from those who spoke openly, but from those who watched still, numbers lurking in the background, people who knew that Sienna's evidence suggested at a larger picture, and who stressed that if she continued talking, their own precisely hidden sins might be dragged into the light. Hours laterally, when Sienna arrived at her apartment, she locked the door behind her and eventually let the mask slip, her hands shaking as the weight of what she had done, and what she had yet to do, crashed down on her, because for all her countenance at the station, the verity was she was alarmed, not of Nick or Noah, but of what would be once the full story came out, because she knew that setting the wrong person free could mean condemning herself. Flashbacks swamped her mind the night everything changed, the raised voices, the fear, the moment she realized she was standing at the center of commodity far darker than she had ever imagined, and the pledge she made to herself also, that she'd no way again be helpless, no way again let someone additional decide her fate. That pledge was why she had walked into the station not as a victim soliciting for mercy, but as a player making advised moves, revealing just enough to keep herself safe while holding back the details that could flip the entire case on its head. Yet indeed, as she tried to undergird herself, her phone buzzed again, and this time the frequenter ID made her breath hitch. Victor Newman. The discussion was brief, but loaded with recrimination, protection, discretion, fidelity, all wrapped in Victor's unmistakable tone of command, and when the call ended, Sienna goggled at the blank screen, torn between nausea and temptation, because aligning with Victor could shield her from immediate peril, but it would also bind her to the veritably machine that had crushed her in the first place. Across city, The police worked through the night, investigators poring over substantiation with renewed urgency, because Sienna's amended statement had opened doors they hadn't considered ahead, pointing subtly toward another suspect, another motive, another web of falsehoods, and as they connected blotches, it came decreasingly clear that Nick and Noah might not be the engineers of the crime after all. But that didn't mean they were innocent either, and that Argentine area was where Genoa City thrived, where icons fell and villains reinvented themselves. When Nick was eventually allowed a phone call, he didn't vacillate. He called Sharon, his voice breaking as he apologized for dragging Noah into this agony, swearing that he'd do whatever it took to cover his son, indeed if it meant immolating himself, and Sharon heeded through heartbreaks, knowing that similar pledges in Genoa City frequently come at an unsupportable price. Noah, meanwhile, reached out to Audra, his tone softer than anyone would anticipate, confessing that he was spooked, that he didn't know who to trust presently, and Audra's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes, because indeed, she was unsure which side of the story she was on. As the sun rose advanced, pressure mounted on the quarter attorney. Media vans clustered outside the station, captions screaming about the Newman reproach, and within hours the narrative had shifted from shock to judgment, from curiosity to culmination, because Genoa City loves nothing further than watching its elephants bleed. Sienna watched it all unfold on her TV. The faces of Nick and Noah splashed across the screen like exemplary tales, and for a transitory moment guilt flitted through her casket, but it was snappily smothered by resoluteness, because guilt had no way defended her ahead. When she returned to the station latterly that day, summoned again by investigators, the atmosphere was indeed more charged than ahead, and as she sat down, she tasted that the pieces were eventually falling into place, that the verity she had been carrying was about to demand release, whether she was ready or not. The lead operative leaned forward, voice low and deliberate, and told her plainly that if she was holding back information, now was the time to speak, because the consequences of silence were about to escalate, and Sienna felt the room near and around her as she realized that the game was reaching its wind-up. She allowed of Victor's offer, of Sharon's plea, of Nick's haunted eyes, of Noah's rage, and also she allowed of herself, the woman who had survived by conforming, by choosing when to speak and when to stay quiet, and with a deep breath, she began to tell a fuller interpretation of the story, one that shifted blame in unanticipated directions, entwining someone no bone had considered seriously ahead, someone with motive, occasion, and a history of manipulation that suddenly made intimidating sense. Gasps gurgled through the room as the counteraccusation sank in, and by the time Sienna finished, the investigators changed aesthetics that verified what everyone stressed: this case was far bigger than Nick and Noah, and arresting them might have been only the first domino. When news of Sienna's rearmost statement reached the Newmans, responses were explosive. Victor's controlled fury gave way to a rare flicker of query. Victoria realized that commercial damage control might not be enough this time, and Nikki supplicated quietly that whatever verity surfaced would not destroy what remained of their family. Nick and Noah were brought back into interrogation, this time with a different tone, a different line of questioning, and as they heeded to the hints of what Sienna had revealed, both men felt a strange blend of stopgap and dread, because being set free could come with strings attached, and in Genoa City, freedom is infrequently clean. By evening, whispers spread that charges against Nick might be reduced, that Noah could be released pending farther disquisition, but nothing was sanctioned, nothing was guaranteed, and Sienna knew that her final decision still impended, whether to completely expose the real villain or to stop short, leaving enough nebulosity to cover herself. Alone formerly more, she goggled out at the megacity lights, understanding now that she held further power than she had ever imagined, and that with that power came a choice that would define her ever. She could set the bad Joe free and let the system continue its cycle of injustice, or she could burn it all down by telling the whole verity, no matter how numerous lives, including her own, were caught in the deers. And as Genoa City slept uneasily, ignorant of how close it was to another seismic shift, one thing was certain. The fallout from Nick and Noah's arrest was only beginning, and Sienna's coming move would change the young and the restless ever.